But this presentation right now, this is Andrew Clare. This is really the future of drones and the impact on Infosec. Thanks very much.
All right. Thanks everyone for coming. I guess I'll get started here. A little bit of background on myself. I'm actually a PhD student right over here at MIT. I spent the past 6 years studying unmanned vehicles, both how we can actually advance the state of autonomy of these vehicles and also the human interactions that happen when a person is actually controlling these vehicles. And so, frankly, I am not knowledgeable at all about information security. But what I'm here today to talk about is where we're going with unmanned vehicles in the future. And then perhaps at the end have a little bit of a discussion about what the impact of this will be on both our information security needs as the users and developers of these systems, as well as potential threats, honestly, that will be important for all of you to deal with in the future in your domain. So a little bit of a quick overview, like I said. I'm going to start and kind of bear with me for a little bit because I really want to explain to you what these vehicles are capable of today, what we've been doing in the research community to try and advance the capabilities of these vehicles, where we're going in the future. And at the end, I'll try to wrap it back into what might be important to you in terms of information security needs and the implications of that. So, a lot of you may think of drones, that term in the media, as primarily for a military use. But I'm here today to convince you that around the world right now, there are a tremendous number of uses of these vehicles. And that's coming to America in the near future. In the next 2 to 3 years, the FAA is working to start to integrate unmanned vehicles into the national airspace. And we're going to see a lot more of these vehicles in our domain. So this actually happened 2 weeks ago. In Canada, there was a driver who actually had a rollover. His vehicle was mentally, basically had a concussion and couldn't actually find his way after he got out of the vehicle. He basically got lost out in the wilderness. And the rescue services up there were actually able to use a small unmanned vehicle to actually search for and find this person before he froze from hypothermia. Just one example there. In Afghanistan right now, our military is using unmanned vehicles to deliver cargo, to actually keep our pilots out of harm's way for the simple job of simply delivering packages. In Japan right now, they're actually doing most of their crop dusting by unmanned helicopter. Crop dusting is a very dirty job. It's not safe for the person who's actually on board to be actually breathing in those chemicals. And so this is one thing that we could also potentially see come in the United States very soon as well. Tracking weather. NASA is actually currently using unmanned vehicles for tracking hurricane systems, actually flying into weather patterns that are not safe for human pilots to fly into. Google actually just started funding anti-poaching efforts in Nepal and India. So they're actually using small unmanned vehicles to actually find and track poachers and try to intervene before they actually attack some of the animals that are there. Obviously, we have a pirate issue going on off the Somali coast. That's where we see a lot of unmanned vehicle activity as well. The nuclear disaster in Japan, we saw small unmanned vehicles being used to actually go into a radiation area, monitor the radiation, see what was going on, help with their recovery effort there. And even in entertainment, we're actually going to start to see these vehicles in that domain as well. So this is actually in London recently. It's kind of hard to see. But if any of you are Trekkies, any Trekkies in the audience? Maybe? Thank you, sir. Oh, one over there. They actually did an advertisement for the new Star Trek movie using a fleet of small unmanned vehicles to make the Star Trek logo in the sky. Journalists are starting to use these vehicles. So this is an example of a protest in Moscow that happened recently. And so you have some journalists here flying these vehicles up there to be able to get cheaply a view of what's going on at these protests. And finally, we also have scientists here in America already using these vehicles to study wildlife in ways that are not disruptive to those animals, and also to try and get a good count of those animals. So this is actually a very informative article, so I thought I would highlight some of the things that came out of this article. The Interior Department has a high demand for these vehicles right now. And the problem is a lack of trained pilots, essentially. It's actually holding back the use of these vehicles. He sees them as a safer alternative. He actually has some stories in here about a biologist and a pilot who died doing a survey of salmon just because their helicopter crashed. So why can't that be done by an unmanned vehicle? They can be flown in less than ideal weather. in areas such as volcanoes, where we may not actually want to venture with piloted vehicle. And generally right now it takes 2 or more people per vehicle to actually fly these vehicles. But what we're doing in our research is trying to actually lower the number of people necessary per vehicle. Okay, so that's what we're currently doing. Let's talk about what we're doing in the research community to advance it. And I'm not trying to do this to scare you, although I think this is a generally paranoid crowd when you talk about information security experts. But I also want you to know where we're going in the future, so that you can actually start to think about the implications for your work. So this is actually my lab advisor. She is a former fighter pilot in the Navy. Her name is Missy Cummings. She actually wrote a book about her experience. And about 15 or 20 years ago, she actually quit being a pilot in the Navy because she saw that her F-18 aircraft could land on an aircraft carrier better than she could. And so she sort of saw the writing on the wall and said to herself, I need to go back into research and start talking about these unmanned vehicles. So right now she's a professor here at MIT, and I've worked with her for the past 6 years researching unmanned vehicles. And actually just this week was the very first unmanned vehicle flying off of an aircraft carrier. So I think she sort of saw 15 or 20 years ago what was coming and got some more job security, as the last speaker just spoke about. So this is our lab. Feel free to check out our lab website. We do a lot of work on the interactions between people and different autonomous systems. So whether it's military systems, air traffic control, nuclear power plants, very mission critical activities where you have potentially a person supervising a very highly automated system. That's what we work on. So this is where we're going. Maybe it's a little scary to all of you, but this is the vision of all of us who do autonomy research, where we're going to have all these vehicles all networked to each other, talking to each other. And this is potentially for military operations, but I just showed you how many different types of domestic commercial applications are going to be coming as well. But this is what it actually looks like right now to the operators who use these vehicles. So a lot of you may be computer scientists and maybe in the user experience field. That whole user experience revolution has not come to the unmanned vehicle realm. We haven't figured out very well how to make systems that are usable and easy for people to actually interact with. So a lot of what we do is trying to make it easier for these folks to actually control these vehicles. Right now they use one of these, a little hand controller, to actually fly them. But we actually said, why couldn't we actually do this with a smartphone? So one of the first videos that I'll show you, I'll go through a set of videos of cool unmanned vehicle things that are going on in our research, was actually developing an app so that a person could actually control one of these vehicles in a much more simple manner. But of course this adds automation and computer software is what we're doing, which, as we just heard, was a vulnerability. Right? And so what I'm going to show you is how we're advancing autonomy, but also potentially adding vulnerability to these systems. My research personally is on multi-vehicle control. So if you could have actually a fleet of these vehicles doing some kind of search, for example, that person was lost in Canada, they could have found him a lot faster if they had multiple vehicles in the air, actually coordinating the search process. And actually we've demonstrated this outdoors as well, so it's not just all in nice indoor controlled environments. We actually have multiple vehicles collaborating with each other for some kind of search and rescue type operation. You can see here one vehicle searching for a ground target, sending imagery back to a person. All highly automated in that the vehicles are actually working with each other, 2 vehicles to actually do this search. So that's all good and fine, and a lot of you may be saying, oh, okay, we're pretty safe right now because this is all in high altitude, outdoors, GPS-based environments. Well, actually, our friends over at CSAIL here at MIT are saying, oh, we don't need GPS anymore. What if we actually have these vehicles flying around indoors in GPS-denied environments, making their own maps of the environment, flying in through windows to actually do their own activities such as that? And so you're still probably thinking to yourself, oh, that's still not that bad. It's just this little quad rotor. I could probably like knock it out with, I could just hit it with my own hand. Well, now our friends at CSAIL found a way to make fast, fixed-wing aircraft that can do rapid mapping of their environment and actually fly around in completely unmapped environments such as a parking garage at rapid speeds. And so you're still probably saying to yourself, oh, this isn't that bad yet. I can still see this thing. I know it's coming. I know if it's trying to infiltrate my building or something like that.
It could help me find my car.
It could help you find your car, actually, if you lost it in a parking garage.
In about a half hour.
It could be. So how about a UAV that can actually fly and perch on a building and actually stay there until it needs to be used for some use, or maybe to do some surveillance, without having to use any of the power to be flying that entire time? This is a group out of Stanford who did that research. And then DARPA actually came and said, no, those are all too big. We need to miniaturize everything that you're working on. So they created a hand-sized hummingbird type UAV that can fly like that, fly in through your window, come into your office, maybe plug in a little bit USB key into your computer, and cause some havoc in your system, right? And that was still too big. So our friends up at Harvard said, why can't we make one that's quarter-sized and can actually fly and do maneuvers? Not quite sure what they'll do with this yet, but you can imagine putting some sensors on there to both do some surveillance or some, let's say, logging into your network, examples like that. Okay, so that's my scaring you videos of what we're trying to do. Basically, our job as researchers is to make these things reality, make all the things that we used to think of as science fiction start to come true in reality. But where are we actually going? I'm sure all of you have heard about Google cars, right? So I view that as a type of unmanned vehicle. They're using the same kind of autonomy that we're developing for aircraft and putting it on cars. So we're going to have definitely driverless cars in the near future. We're going to have for fire, urban search and rescue applications, firefighting applications. We're going to start to have robotic vehicles that can do that very soon. My advisor actually in the Office of Naval Research are building an autonomous helicopter that can do medical evacuation of soldiers in a battle zone, or dropping off cargo completely autonomously. And we're also going to have it in manufacturing, right? So we no longer need people driving around carts to move things around in a manufacturing plant. And we can actually start to help people with some of the more routine activities that they do on a manufacturing line with robots such as Baxter, which came from a local company founded by Rodney Brooks. So in the further future, I'm going to take out my crystal ball for a second and start to think about where we're actually going. The first place you're going to see these UAVs are in agriculture. Not that big of a deal for all of us, kind of out in the fields on their own. They're actually a really funny video you should all go look up online about the burrito bomber, where they actually have a vehicle that they've demonstrated can parachute a burrito down to you that you order from your smartphone. May happen, may not happen soon. As well as a beer copter, which is actually going to be used in South Africa at a festival this summer, where you order beer from your smartphone and it parachutes down to you from a local helicopter. As well as some low-altitude photography. You can imagine if you're trying to sell your home. Maybe it'd be really cool to have a fly-around video of what your home and your property looks like. There are going to be companies coming up soon that can do that for you. Later on, I think it's going to take quite a while before the Google car and self-driving cars actually become a reality. But I'm thinking in the next 5 to 7 years when you may see them for taxi services in limited places at first, and see where we go from there, as well as automated passenger trains. 10 plus years before we ever get anything large and automated flying in our sky, because the FAA is really holding back regulation right now to try and keep us from going there too quickly. I think that's the right thing to do for safety reasons, but it's going to take quite a while before we actually get there. Please.
What about battle zones?
Battle zones? So right now, I mean, we are using UAVs. They're very not automated whatsoever. They're very remotely piloted, teleoperation. The military wants to get to the point where we're using more and more automation for flying. I think there's a lot of resistance. I think it's good resistance to having automated decision-making on board that autonomy, on board those aircraft, but we're moving in that direction.
I meant specifically about the cargo delivery. That seems
Cargo
like
delivery?
a very desirable thing for the military.
Oh yeah, yeah. So like I said right now, there is a vehicle that's doing cargo delivery in Afghanistan that are UAVs. It's not necessarily highly automated, but it certainly is what we're doing right now, and they're moving in that direction. Certainly. And in 20 plus years, there's actually a company local here in Boston called Terrafugia that's working on personal flying cars for you. So if you guys want to be like the Jetsons one day and actually have your personal flying car, it's coming, slowly, but it's coming. As well as one day, you may pay $20 to fly from here to California on an unpiloted commercial aircraft. And I always like to ask people, what price point would it have to get down to before you would get on an unpiloted commercial aircraft? And especially among my generation, they're like, oh, anything cheap, I'll do it. When I asked my grandma about that, she says never. Right? So we're seeing this generational shift where eventually it's going to happen. Someone is going to found the first unpiloted commercial airline. So this is actually more important to you.
It's just regarding unmanned commercial airlines, how much control in just commercial airlines today, how much of the piloting is controlled by software?
Yep. So when you get on an Airbus airplane, it is capable of taking off, cruising, and landing with zero pilot input at this point. And for the vast majority of the flying that we do, the pilot is simply a supervisor of a highly automated system. It's a matter of whether the pilot chooses or not to use that automation, but it's certainly there right now. Good question. So this is probably more important to all of you, which is what does this mean for ethical, legal, and information security in your field? So the first question that a lot of us have is we're developing complex automation. Part of my job is to actually code some of that automation right now as a researcher. Frankly, we don't think much about how robust or how secure or how safe or how certified this automation is in the research community. But when we actually start to put this in the field, this is going to be a huge problem for us. And I think that your field has thought a lot about how you certify complex, let's say, web-based automation. And that's some of the information that we're going to need. Some of those techniques for certification are things that we're going to need very soon. When you talk about ethics, responsibility, and liability, let's just take the Google car for a second. When something goes wrong, when the first accident happens with your self-driving car, who is actually responsible for the action of that self-driving car? Was it the operator who was literally sleeping at the wheel because that's what we thought we could do nowadays? Was it the computer on board your self-driving car who was responsible? Was it Google themselves or your company who helped build that automation? Or was it literally the engineer who at some point programmed that automation is now going to be legally liable when something happens with that self-driving car? These are sort of the questions that we're starting to ask. A lot of lawyers are getting very heavily involved right now to figure out these questions. And there are also going to be questions for us in our aerial unmanned vehicles as well. And then privacy. Obviously, privacy is a large concern when it comes to these kinds of vehicles. This is a recent article that I just saw online the other day, actually, that a person was flying one of these little quadrotors around and basically said, it's my legal right to fly this around and take pictures of you and your beautiful wife sitting outside, and you can't stop. And so really right now there's no legal framework in place for privacy with these vehicles, and I think this is a huge concern. And of course, the fashion industry is getting involved, and they're making anti-drone wear that you can buy for $2,000 right now. If you want to hide from infrared cameras, feel free to go online and buy these right now. And so I'm going to put this up here because, like I said, I am not an information security professional whatsoever. But I wanted to have an open discussion with all of you about these issues that I think are problems for us, both in terms of the security of our vehicles, right? So GPS spoofing has already happened. We believe it has already happened with an actual unmanned vehicle over Iran for them to actually take one of our vehicles. Also, a group out of Texas has demonstrated that they were able to actually essentially take over a Department of Homeland Security drone that was flying and doing surveillance on the border down there. They actually demonstrated that they could, in fact, hack their control system. When we talk about supply chain security, right? So these vehicles are being manufactured somewhere, and securing them along that entire supply chain is a problem that we need to also figure out. Actually, when the last speaker talked about Bluetooth connection in his car, some GM cars actually have Bluetooth connection from the brakes. Literally, your foot pedal to the actual brakes is a Bluetooth connection. And so let's talk about that as a vulnerability for cars as well. When we talk about interaction between regular cars and these unmanned vehicles, and airplanes, regularly piloted airplanes versus unmanned airplanes, that is a big problem that we're going to have. So then that's sort of the safety aspect of information security where we're going to need help. But then there's also the sort of defensive information security. So how do you, as an information security professional, do counter surveillance against a small micro UAV that can actually fly in your window and do something to your system? How do you actually protect your data when you actually have all these images that are being taken by all these different cameras and sensors? And generally, and I think the last speaker hit on this as well, if we start to rely on these automated systems for our farming, for our search and rescue operations, for our cargo delivery. If UPS and FedEx all of a sudden move to an entirely automated delivery system for delivering your packages, how much are we beginning to rely on automation when we're not yet there in terms of securing our systems? That's all I really have. I really wanted to open up the floor and see what you all thought. I have business cards later. About these issues, whether you have thoughts on them, whether this seems like an impending problem, the information security community, or if it doesn't. I open the floor. Anyone has a thought on that? Please.
I actually have another question to add to it. Maybe you can shed some light given the research we've done. Is there a precedent for this, what seems like a dramatic change in technology, the coming of automation in an area that really didn't have automation before? Is there a precedent in history for something similar to this that had an effect on us that might shed some light on what's coming?
It's a good question. I mean, you look at things like, specifically within the aviation domain, when we moved from manual control links to fly-by-wire aircraft, right? So all of a sudden we embedded a computer system in the airplane such that when I move the control column, it's no longer physically connected to my elevator or my aileron. That scared a lot of pilots for a while. They literally had to build trust in that computer that it was going to do what they needed to do at high speed so that they didn't die. But that worked. People eventually got past that, realized the benefits of it, and they were always closed systems, such that those computers were not connected to the internet or anything like that. This is a little bit different, right? I mean, this we're talking about literally networking all of these vehicles, probably over some kind of Bluetooth or internet-like connection. And I think it exposed us to a lot of different issues that we haven't dealt with before. So I don't know if there's a clear precedent, but you could draw some analogies. That's a great point.
Are there any developments on regulatory aspects?
So regulation, like I said, the only regulation that's come out, in the United States at least, is that about a year ago they passed an FAA Reauthorization Act that said that the FAA is required to attempt to integrate unmanned vehicles into the National Airspace System by 2015. The problem with that regulation is that they didn't necessarily define what an unmanned vehicle even was. They didn't define what integration meant. And so there's a lot of ambiguity right there as to what that actually means for the unmanned vehicle domain. And there's a lot of open questions that still need to be answered, especially about privacy. I think that a lot of local communities are starting to pass some laws about unmanned vehicles and drones and what's allowed and what's not allowed, but there's no uniform application regulation that's out there. Please.
Yeah. Once this stuff becomes extremely popular, do you think that people will start building anti? Because if you could jam the signals, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like your example of, somebody coming in and invading your privacy, right?
Yeah.
If you could jam the signals, like even around your house, the other thing too is just pick up a shotgun and pull away the. No, I'm just saying.
No, it's very true.
I think people, whenever you have a technology, you're going to have people that do the anti-technology, right?
Yeah.
So, and the other thing too is, like you say, if regulations in the air, will people start passing things even, for those reasons? Because all of a sudden now, you start seeing tons of these things in the air all the time and all that stuff, and you'd be very. I'm saying you could go after the communication links and those sort of things.
No, I completely.
Because that technology already exists, jamming technology, right? Probably expensive.
Important point of illegal as well. You think about cell phones, as annoying as they are, it is a punishable, I think a rather dramatically punishable if you jam.
You mean on, okay, yeah.
If you jam on frequency.
And they also don't want you putting them on in airplanes too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys have a great point. I think, like I said, the legal system has not caught up yet to where we've taken the technology. I do think that people are certainly going to start to develop anti-defensive technologies against these. I think that the information security community needs to think about sort of defensive measures against these as well. But also on sort of our side, right? So how do we, the large military contractors, they have very dedicated security teams that are working on securing these connections. But my friend is trying to develop a startup to make these small UAVs that can help farmers in Armenia, his hometown, his home country. And he doesn't have a dedicated security team that's going to help him secure the control link for his vehicle. And so I think that we're going to need assistance in terms of protecting our assets and our vehicles and the people who are working around them. But there also sort of going to be a fight on both sides. I completely agree with that. Actually, sir, please.
Yeah, my experiences has typically showed that once this stuff starts becoming normally out there and we're all exposed to it at some level, it's going to be about 10 years later before any serious security is actually done correctly.
Oh, yeah.
That seems to be about the going pace on that. I mean, like one of the things, the Bluetooth connection between the brakes. There's a lot of high-end expensive cars where a lot of those technologies are in place that control large portions of vehicles. I knew a number of guys that did some research on a lot of these type of technologies being tied into all of this stuff, and they found out that generally all the high-end vehicles have a large amount of Bluetooth controls where you can gain access. One example was one of their experiments, they detonated an airbag on a BMW remotely. As an example, they also found out when I was with them in Norway, they found out that all the major bus and tram systems were accessible via Bluetooth. And the technology that the set points and controls on most of these things were editable, but changeable remotely by anyone who wanted to connect to it.
Yeah.
So the thing comes in with you know, I mean, we're doing the right thing here. We're starting that discussion, but I don't necessarily know how many of us are going to actually be involved in making those decisions. A lot of times, that may be at the drawing board where you're at yourself. You as the designer of the future need to take that into consideration, and that question has to be posed on the table for every, not just the big picture, you know, hey, we're unmanned vehicles, security, but each individual part of the components that make up that technology. This question of security has to be on the table for each one of those. If not, you implement these technology and you know, hey, we can control it with this device here, but programming it, setting it up, all the key components within the technology, can any individual want a piece of that be manipulated externally? And what kind of controls go into preventing that? I know guys that have looked, the same bunch of guys have looked into aircraft control systems to some extent. Now there is some physical activity, since you said it was a closed system, that has to be gained. And I know in some of their research they found out that some of those control systems could physically be gained within a cabin, people cabin.
Yeah, that's surprising.
Not all of them, but some of them that could affect the actual airplane.
I mean, as we add, for example, entertainment systems, you know, we got JetBlue and we can watch our direct TV right now. That has some link in some way to the cockpit.
Yeah, the entertainment systems on the airplanes that I know of are separated from the primary controls on the system. Because I know of some people that have actually crashed those from the consoles on the back of their seats on certain types of planes. So it doesn't have any effect, but it does, you know, those systems are separated, which is one of the key things. Are these systems separated? Are they prevented from interacting from one system to the other? Do the general people have access to it? Are we using, you know, the theoretical close range technology, Bluetooth, that I could attach to a half a mile with an antenna?
Those are all great.
Question. Obviously, your research is based on your viewpoint and the government's viewpoint, you know, who you're coordinating with, but are there other entities, other governments that are further along than us who are actually implementing some of this that you're aware of?
Sure. I mean, if I go back to some of my earlier slides, so really, Most of these examples are not from the United States, right? So when you look at where most of these are actually happening, a lot of other countries are quite a bit ahead of us in terms of implementation. When I think about the research, so the advanced research that's going on, I'd say that the vast majority of the best research is still occurring here in the United States. But in terms of getting experience with actually implementing these in the field, you know, this is India, Japan, London, Moscow. These are other places around the world, Canadian forces that are actually using this. And so my answer is kind of twofold. I think other countries are getting more operational experience, but I think that the sort of advanced research is still mostly here. Please.
I actually have some experience in this field. I had a team of UAV operators that worked for me in Iraq when I was there. And so pretty much what I see, what you're talking about here, is if you look at all of these examples that you've shown, you see an intense ability to be able to save money. And that's what you're going to see from all these commercial entities in the United States is once they kind of come to a realization of the capabilities and then, you know, they buy a team of folks that kind of understands it, that they don't have to deal with it that closely. But then they realize the cost savings. That's usually pretty significant, especially when you're talking about, you know, a couple presentations ago, we talked about what's the value of human life, you know, and in this case, you're talking about that right here. Fukushima, search and rescue operations, disaster relief operations, all those things where you're not quite ready to put humans in there, but you're more than willing to throw technology in there. So I think that's the fundamental driver is the cost savings. And I think once the private corporations here in the United States start seeing more of that, you're going to see this move a lot faster. But I did want to add one additional thing about where should the security community get involved. And if you see over the last year, the United States Navy has put out some pretty significant papers about combining electronic warfare and cyber warfare. So I'm sorry, I don't like the terms. But you know, UAVs are being looked at a lot as a way to get into networks, not via flying in the window, plugging in a USB, but through the electromagnetic spectrum. So as a security community, if you're not thinking about how to protect your network from threats that aren't coming in through your wires, through an electronic spectrum, whether or not you have any sort of Bluetooth or other radio antennas, that would be the next place that I would be looking to protect your network from. So you need to look at that active approach. And UAVs is one way that you're going to be able to do that, is to be able to park them right outside your window and then shoot whatever sort of electromagnetic energy over whatever frequency spectrum that you want to be able to get into that network.
Or optical.
Or up.
Thank you for that. I mean, this is what I kind of wanted to show where the technology is going, and I completely agree with your sentiment that the economics are going to drive this like crazy. It's really going to accelerate very quickly. And exactly, you're right. You don't even need to physically plug in anything at this point. It can all be done through electromagnetic spectrum. So I like that. It's great. Please.
Well, to go along with this point about the economics driving the utilization of UAVs, that's actually a problem that, from a security standpoint, is going to hinder us because security costs money. If you start increasing the cost of these devices, people aren't going to use them as much, or if they find they can use it, but cut a few corners, they will. That's why, as was noted previously, the security really needs to be built in from the ground up, not as an add-on later, not as a cost that can be cut. We don't have to upgrade it, it works fine the way it is.
And I think that, as I mentioned, I think the larger contractors and developers are thinking about these things because they've had that experiences. What I'm most concerned about are sort of the small businesses that are going to start this up very soon to do all of these more commercial applications, and I think that they're not thinking about it as much as they should. So, please.
Yeah, just to go back to your, like, saying it takes two and trying to get less operators.
Yeah.
But there's been so much research, I mean, through MIT and others on robotics and surroundings, that you should be able to almost get down to zero operators for certain tasks, right? Those types of things.
Yeah.
Is that kind of stuff being looked at? Because, I mean, obviously we can, you know, try to look around at its surroundings and use the same robotics information that's been like,
Certainly. So some of the slides that I showed earlier, if I can get it back.
like when you
A lot of these are working autonomously.
Okay.
So this system that was flying through Windows has no person whatsoever actually involved.
Okay.
And so I think that that's where the research community is trying to go. A lot of our research is on higher level decision making in very uncertain command and control environments. And so I think you're still going to see an operator involved in those kind of more strategic level decisions. But something like crop dusting or basically just doing back and forth surveillance of a crop to see what state it's at can be completely automated. I completely agree with you on that. And that's what the direction that we're moving. And way in the back, actually. Someone back there. Okay. Please.
Well, two questions. One was raised earlier about where the adoption is happening. And it's interesting to me that it's not happening in the U.S. as much as it is elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So why is that? And then tying into that, it appears that we're at a threshold between operator teleoperation and automation or autonomous. And what's going to push us? I have a feeling that's an important, obviously, is a very important threshold. So, a crop independent, not involved with a big city and lots of human life and et cetera. I could see that being adopted, obviously, sooner. The thing that's holding it back from wider adoption is safety and concerns about the outcome of a mistake. And you said there have been some some notable ones or whatever. So what's holding back the U.S.? Is it lawsuits?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll go back to my crystal ball slide for a second. So one of the main reasons why the United States hasn't seen commercial applications is our regulatory system. So this bill was just passed about a year ago, authorizing the FAA to start to look into the integration of it. But frankly, the national airspace in the United States is the most complex system in the world. We have the busiest airspace in the world right now with just all of our regular commercial and private general aviation aircraft. So that's one of the reasons why we're taking our time. When you look at places like Australia, who has the outback at their disposal to do testing in, they've done a lot more testing than we're capable of doing. When you look at our military, however, we do have the most advanced and the best unmanned vehicle technology because they're able to use controlled airspace to actually do their testing. So the difference is between sort of the commercial private applications versus the military applications in terms of comparing us to the rest of the world. In terms of your question about automation, I agree with you that we're trying, and basically our lab is trying to figure out what are the appropriate places to have some kind of what we call human supervisory control, where you're not necessarily directly stick and rudder flying the aircraft, but there's still a human in the loop involved in the control process, versus what are the applications where it really truly could be completely automated. And we are looking at those questions. And I completely agree with you that figuring out that allocation between those two is a very important question for us. Please, sir.
I know that the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration came out this week, I think, and told Congress that it wants money to be doing more research into cybersecurity for not autonomous vehicles, but sort of the accident avoidance and the sort of electronic vehicles. So you mentioned the Bluetooth tire sensors and all the different, so the systems on automobiles are becoming significantly interconnected and complex that it's unclear whether they're vulnerable to attack, and if so, if the attack could be one and cause injury. My sense is that the ball sort of dropping between the outfielders at the federal government level, that it's not really clear who has oversight of these types of issues, and if there are regulations to be made, who should be making them. I mean, is there a role for more government sort of oversight of how these features are implemented? Because my sense now is that a lot of these features are, a lot of the technology is feature-driven, but not necessarily with a lot of thought as to possible attack vectors or ways that these features might go wrong or badly wrong.
You bring up a lot of good points. So my understanding of the regulatory framework for automobiles is that it's all state by state. So for example, Nevada California, and I believe Florida are the only 3 states right now where you can legally test an autonomous car or self-driving car, because those legislatures have chosen to do that to kind of bring some business to their state. I think at some point the federal government will have to get involved to sort of regulate this on a national level, but currently it's state by state. And I think that in terms of security, very few people are talking about that when it comes to self-driving cars. I think it's great that NHTSA is getting involved in that. My advisor actually just is putting out a policy paper on issues with self-driving cars. And one of the papers that she just cited said that, if, for example, in Austin, Texas, there are people using GPS jammers just because they want to. And while your personal GPS, when you're driving around in a car, will still be able to know close enough where you are to work, the high precision GPS necessary for a self-driving car won't be able to work, right? And so how do you actually deal with that problem is something that people are starting to look into, but still at a very, very early stage. I think I have time for
Yeah, one more question.
maybe one more question. Sure.
The coordination among various regulatory agencies, like let us say therapy just case, it's a flying car, as well it can run also. So they are using interoperable same kind of equipment like GPS or driving wheel kind of thing for both. So in terms of coordination between aviation regulatory agencies as well as like state transportation agencies have to come together, understand the dynamics of such vehicles, understand the risks of that vehicle in totality rather than looking in isolation.
Yeah, and it's definitely a problem. I know the founder of Therapeutic. He's a PhD, former PhD student from MIT. And I mean, he has to separately work with the FAA and various state and federal automotive regulatory bodies. And they're not talking to each other at this point. And I completely agree with you at some point. Okay, thank you everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.